All right. So we're already 4 weeks into the term. Pretty incredible. Things are going fast. We're going to have snow on the ground here pretty quick. It's been crazy. Quick end of summer. Tonight we're going to talk about banking and interest rates. Pretty topical discussion here because things have changed. With the rates of inflation, we haven't seen this in a long time. And some of the old strategies, well, nothing's working right now, I'll tell you the truth. If somebody's got a great place to put your money, maybe real estate, but, the market's getting hammered, so this is probably a time to be sitting on the sidelines there, unless you're already in, and it's certainly no time to be getting out at the bottom. But holding just straight cash is not great. Gold, we'll talk about gold, but there's people out there called gold bugs that are generally kind of an older crowd, and they're patiently waiting for gold to make this rebound, which kind of sort of hasn't happened. So I've got some gold. I mean, just like a lot of people, but anyway, it's not where it should be. So tough times. So, but what we're going to talk about are banks and stuff. So banking in general. First off, there's, when people talk about the big banks, and there are some that transition or cross over, Bank of America and maybe Chase and some of these other guys. But there's a whole bunch of banks that work in terms of finance for corporations and, selling stock and stuff like that, J.P. Morgan, granted it's J.P. Morgan Chase, I guess, so they do have a consumer element, but there's, Lehman Brothers used to be out there and some other people like that are not, kind of your consumer banks. They're more for people on the large scale. And then the way they're defining, they're calling these commercial banks. Anyway, that's, more of a, I would even think it's for personal use and also business as well. But anyway, those are the ones that we're kind of used to. Now, this book gets kind of wrapped up in the way things used to be. For you and your generation, you've probably never seen all these divisions. There used to be savings and loans, that's all they did. And then credit unions were separate, and, it became a big deal like 20 years ago probably when you could start writing checks, and they still call them like share drafts or something goofy, but it's essentially all the same stuff. So mobile deposits, you really don't find. There used to be, banks like Wells Fargo and B of A and some of the other banks, local banks too, could do more services than some of the savings and loans, and certainly more services than the credit unions. Now, deregulation. I mean, this deregulation took place, I think, it was like 30 years ago. A lot of it happened under Reagan. So, I mean, anyway, they're going to throw up these kind of artificial, separations between banks, and it, for the most part, it just doesn't matter. And things have gotten much better for you as a consumer. This FDIC limit of $250,000, the insurance. If there was a run on the bank, that's what those guys do. It's not so much a secret, but banks don't necessarily, well, they don't have all of your money sitting there waiting. They may have millions and millions of dollars under deposit, but if everybody shows up at once, they don't have your money. They don't have everybody's money, and so they go under. So that's called a run on the bank, because banks get your money and they loan it back out. And there's limits, by the federal government and all that, the percent they can loan out. But, it's probably larger amounts than you would think. And everything works fine. And anyway, that's why this FDIC is there, is because if people didn't have confidence in the banks, they'd want to go grab all their cash, and that would truly collapse the system and cause all kinds of problems. You may or may not find it interesting, but a bank, and believe me, I'm no fan of them, but Bank of America has been around forever, and they were actually a San Francisco bank, and they're called the Bank of Italy. but they were around so long that they used to be, Bank of Italy. Well, Italy wasn't on the right side of the war in World War II, so they changed their name on that. But anyway, the reason why, even before that, the reason why Bank of Italy, Bank of America survived is because the owner, he was an Italian guy. He was very aggressive in terms of when there were runs on the banks happening during the Depression, and this is in the 30s. Obviously, none of us were there, but it was very serious. Anyway, what he did was they put stacks of gold, under guard, but they openly displayed them, in the windows of the banks and all that stuff. And when people came to fretting about whether their money was there, here's this one bank that seems to be in good shape. I mean, they've got, tons of money. So anyway, other banks were run, and they could have been, well-run banks, but obviously if all the depositors show up and want their money, the bank will fail. So anyway, a little side. Savings institutions. So again, this is what we're talking about, credit unions. Do we care? No, you're going to pretty much go where the best deal is. So the homework for tonight, people always get confused about this. You're not going to find the main part of the homework in the book. It's going to be to evaluate, your current bank and then maybe another couple bank alternatives and kind of find out what's best for you. So there's pros and cons about local banks versus online banks and all the rest of that. And I'm not trying to get you to switch banks. There's advantages to each kind. But anyway, what you don't want to have happen is find out you're in one of these banks that's kind of ripping you off. And I've dealt with some of the local banks, and tell you the truth, there's a business bank that I use that's not suitable for most of you because it's a business one, but I have a primary bank, but that's my old military bank from Texas, and I haven't had too much problem with them. But the business bank, compared to the local stuff was just a complete ripoff. I don't know whether it was 10 or it seemed like about $10, and then all sorts of little charges for this or that. All that stuff is completely free with it's called Novo. Anyway, they're semi-new, but they're strictly an online bank. And the best thing about them is they do the mobile deposits easily, where the other ones I ended up always having checks sent back to me or disallowed. And if you're a business owner, it's a huge hassle when you're depositing checks and all of a sudden, they're being returned to you and essentially, they're telling you the check bounced when it was just their crappy software couldn't process it. So anyway, I haven't been with those guys long, and maybe they'll go sideways on me too. But I have dealt with most of the local banks, and just simple things. If you get direct deposit, I noticed that one of my coworkers, he had direct deposit as well, and his direct deposit ended up in his checking account a day before mine when I was using the local bank. Well, that's not fair. Or I would sell a piece of equipment or sell something big, take a cashier's check, which is, the reason why you do that is because it's essentially as good as cash. And then they want to put a hold on it. It's like, well, this defeats the purpose. So we'll go more into details on what some of those instruments are, but it's a competitive market out there, and so you need to make sure that the bank you're associated with is worthwhile. Now, we're going to also talk about your financial plan tonight, the term project. And let me just tell you, if you're using a finance company, your financial plan is not working out for you. These guys are pretty predatory. These are guys that strictly do consumer finance type loans, and they usually have some sort of workaround. There's a concept called usury where banks are prohibited from charging above a certain interest rate, and that's done by the states, right? And so some of these institutions, whether they call them like the payday loan type people or pawn loans or something, they have manipulated things where they don't do that type of loan, so they're not really in violation of the usury laws. Or you see other states that, Delaware, or even North Dakota also, where they tend to have all the credit card companies that can charge huge rates because they've got very business friendly, as in not consumer friendly at all, laws. So, that's one of the things where our current president sometimes gets in trouble, where he, was responsible for a lot of laws dealing with bankruptcy that were very friendly to the lenders and very harmful to consumers. So, but that's the nature of the state that he's from, because that's what Delaware does, is that if you want to have a business in your whatever, you want to incorporate in Delaware, if you think you're going to be encountering legal challenges, because the Delaware legal system is very favorable to corporations and not so much for consumers. So, securities firms, insurance companies, so to a limited extent insurance companies, but securities firms are almost, and then they have investment companies. Again, this distinction between securities and investments, those walls have kind of come down. And then financial conglomerates, where you can do it all at once, which could be good, could be bad. I still tend to like a bank, and then perhaps an investment or a securities firm, whatever you want to. Most of those, the security firm being combined with a brokerage, is common. If not, I don't know any that keep themselves separate anymore. So anyway, how banks work. Yep. So they accept deposits, they provide loans, do credit cards. So that's where the banks get the money to loan. They're loaning out your deposits. So that's what I was talking about with insolvency and stuff like that, where banks can't get themselves into trouble. Security subsidies. They could sell mutual funds, brokerage, and then insurance. Yeah, I don't do much in the way of financial transactions with insurance companies. Most insurance products, because of the laws, because of the complexity of the stuff they sell, there's usually a person involved. That person obviously wants to be paid, so they're typically under commission. Securities and brokerages, for the most part, have gone all commission free. So checking services, yep, and even checks. I had a student, he was a European a few years ago, and he stopped me after class and asked me, why do we do checks? It's not very common in Europe, not at all. They have their own, kind of things, but they do a whole lot more like a debit card type thing. But it's kind of a hybrid. But they'll talk about chip and pin, where it's not uncommon when you use a credit card. In fact, I don't remember ever signing credit card receipts in Europe. It's usually they just hand you the keypad and you put in your pin, or nothing at all. But a signature, that's kind of a U.S. thing. There was also a thing, and I heard this a long time ago, but I never really saw it in practice, where, when I was living in Spain, where they claimed that, only people who can't afford things use credit cards. That's some sign of weakness or something. I don't think that exists anymore. They're as addicted to credit cards as we are, or at least electronic, payments, just for the ease of it. And the government is all about, electronic stuff, because it's so much easier for them to keep track of it, and perhaps turn it off if they want, if it's done electronically. So anyway, paying bills on time. Yep, don't do that. Most everybody has, paperless billing as an option. Yeah, all kinds of things. I don't see too many people leasing cars. Keep in mind, if you're leasing a car, it's sort of like a rental, but again, it's not unlimited miles, so you're responsible for the condition of the vehicle, the miles on the vehicle, just all kinds of other things, that all to maybe get a little bit lower entrance price. So debit cards are great. I used to use debit cards almost exclusively, but it does make balancing your checking account very difficult because unless you really are on top of keeping track of those receipts. And also the protections on credit cards are mandated by law, where a lot of the policies regarding debit cards, they may be similar to credit cards, but they're typically more of a policy thing driven by the credit card company. So, a lot of times if you're ripped off, let's say on a credit card, and the credit card company acts like they're, so magnanimous that, you were caught that theft and we're so happy. In fact, we're going to give you a credit. Well, yeah, you kind of have to by law. Your rights, if you report it timely that there's been fraud, you have some protection. And the merchants, they may think they've got protection, but for the most part, I've had credit cards, stolen or whatever, and one of the merchants said, well, they still had your card, you're still responsible. Where's the signature? Well, they didn't have any of that because I wasn't there. That was a situation where I was at a restaurant, used a credit card. They claimed they gave me the credit card back. I know they didn't. And then sure enough, the next morning, one of the microbrew places, craft brew places showed up with a whole bunch of bills charging my credit card. And anyway, the merchant ate that because, they clearly, for convenience, they didn't check anybody's ID and they just assumed the guy's credit card was good, as they do. I mean, that's just a common business practice. But it does mean that they're responsible. I take credit cards for transactions, but Square changed their policy a couple years ago where if you didn't have a chip reader, you were liable for fraud. If you just used their old swipe reader, you had problems. So caused everybody to switch to using a chip. So anyway, online banking is just easier for most places, but each to his own. So monitoring your balance. Yeah, so writing in your checkbook. Most people just don't write that many checks. I write probably 5 a year. So most everything for most people is done by credit cards. Or a lot of times I'll do it through the bank itself. I'll have people set on some sort of bill pay type thing, and the bank essentially writes and sends them a check just because it's easier for me to keep track of it at the end of the year, because they'll have photocopies and records of where that check went. And most banks will actually do that with physical checks now too. So anyway, you have to keep track of it. That's why, like I said, I tend to use credit cards more than anything else. Now, that doesn't relieve you from having to check things, but now you're going through to check for fraud, and while you're doing that, you're also looking at the amounts. But you will find fraud typically much quicker than when the bank will. So, and sometimes what the bank will think is fraud, they'll shut down your credit card. Like, let's say you're taking a road trip and you're making good time, and they see you, I bought a truck down in Texas and drove it up in Montana pretty quickly, and they're looking at the distances involved, and they thought, oh, this is not reasonable, this credit card is traveling too fast, and so they shut it down. And yeah, it's easy to get it resolved. Check float, this used to be a thing. Now checks are done electronically. What used to happen was this was a way for people to build like private pilot time, because checks were processed at a central facility, and it took days, so guys would build time by flying checks to the central hub, because it was worth it for banks to, pay a pilot to haul a box of checks to the big town. And but now they're all pretty much done electronically, so it's just like using a debit card where they're scanned in and it's done electronically. Credit cards, Visa, MasterCard. There's others out there, but these guys are pretty dominant. if you've ever used an American Express or a Discover or some of these other ones, it just makes for kind of a fatter wallet. When you get to some place and they don't take them, again, you'll probably work for an employer who's going to sign you up with, oh God, I've had to have Diners Club, American Express, all these other ones, and most merchants are just like, yeah, that's not going to work here. The reason for that is like American Express, typically these guys charge a couple 3%, to the merchant. So the merchant, you charge $100 worth of stuff, and the merchant gets, $97. They, I as a merchant, whoever is a merchant doesn't really like that. Well, when you have American Express and they want to charge 4.3 or something like that, you're like, well, that's too much. And anyway, so you skip it. And so that's why some of those cards aren't taken. So debit card, we know how those work. Yeah, it could be used for teenagers. Anyway, but again, a debit card, you can get some with limits. And you can get some prepaid MasterCards that'll work, or Visa cards. But for the most part, these are traditional ones and debit cards. Debit cards, the reason why I used to use them, because, yeah, it kept you from running up a balance. And the bank that I was using at the time paid me 15 cents for every time I used it, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it was like, somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 by the end of the month, typically. Safety deposit boxes. There aren't enough safety deposit boxes for everybody out there. I mean, there are some safety deposit boxes, but most people, have some sort of fireproof gun safe or something like that. But safety deposit boxes are a little pricey, and there's an annual rental and that kind of stuff. ATMs, pretty popular. This may be one of the things, if you're somebody who uses an ATM a lot and you're paying fees, well, you shouldn't be. A lot of times they'll say, okay, there's no fees if it's within the network, which can be a hassle all on its own. I use an online bank, and obviously they're not going to necessarily be part of networks, but their deal is that they refund all ATM fees. So, whether the ATM's going to charge me $3 or $2 or $4, that's transparent to me because I get it all back at the end of the month. So if you are paying ATM fees, that's might be, reason alone to switch banks, especially if you're, having to go to some special ATM to find one that's, in your network that's fuels too much money to be doing stuff like that. So cashier's check, the cashier's checks are different. This is what I said. I was kind of, and I typically don't mind taking checks, but this was, I was a little excavator I was selling. It was $20-some thousand bucks, and so I didn't know the guy, and I was giving him the piece of equipment, and he gave me the cashier's check. But then when I went to the local bank, they said they were going to put a hold on it, and clearly they don't understand the concept of a cashier's check. A cashier's check, as opposed to just a check you write, a personal check. A cashier's check, let's say you're going to write a check for $20,000. You go to the bank and you get that check, and that bank locks down that amount of money in your account. So that check will not bounce. That bank knows that check is going to come back to them, and so they're going to reserve that amount of money in your account. And so you, as the person accepting it, have, a little higher level of security. But this bank, was whatever. They're just basically screwing you because they can make some money on the money that they don't pay you, because it's, contributes to their the money they have on hand, and they're earning interest on that, so they want to try and delay, giving you your money, and so it's kind of a rotten thing. Money orders, I use these about every 10 years. Every time you need to get a passport for some reason, maybe they've changed now, but the State Department always wanted a money order. Not the end of the world if you got to get one. I think you can get them at the post office, but you certainly can get them at Walmart, places like that. Walmart tends to cater to a lot of people who are what they call unbanked. Means people who pay little fees for stuff because they don't have an association with any bank at all, and Walmart's trying to kind of slide into that niche. But anyway, money orders are, they're not that useful except in certain circumstances. They're for people who don't have checks, or sometimes businesses want them, but there are fees involved, so not something you're really going to run into. Traveler's check, never use them. I've seen people, I've been out in the middle of nowhere, and I've seen people with, traveler's checks that are made to be out in the middle of nowhere, and, I'm able to check out of the hotel just fine with my credit card, and they're getting hassled over their traveler's check. So I haven't used or even seen these in several years. So the only place where I've really had, and it wasn't that big a deal, but there was some tension, was Cuba, because Cuba is not part of the U.S. banking thing. If you're Canadian, the Cuban experience is a whole different thing, because Canadians, they and Cuba have financial exchanges and stuff. But if Cuba opens up again and you end up going there, the only money you have is the money you bring in, and so it's very difficult. Ended up having to go exchange money all the time. Great place to go, The people there, I mean, they hate communism more than anybody I've ever seen. I mean, they don't need it explained to them. You look at these palatial homes and the windows are crumbling and the trash isn't getting picked up, and all the cool things are from way back when they had capitalism back in the 50s. But anyway, it's very non-political. It was cool in that regard, but finances were a hassle. But stuff was wicked cheap. So criteria used to, convenience is pretty important, in terms of time. Paying bills online, efficiently. Like I say, not everybody's software is the same. This Nova Bank is, again, whatever. It sounds like I'm promoting them, but I know 99% of you have, can't be their customers because they're a business bank. But man, if they ever had a personal bank, I might go with them just because they're just so convenient and no hassles. Anyway, deposit rates, interest rates. If you're counting on interest rates in a bank, you're probably screwing up. We'll look at the rates, but you're nowhere near keeping up with inflation. And then Walmart, but a good bank will have fees that are lower than Walmart. Walmart would be people, who have, say, $200 in their account, so they're getting hit with a monthly, service charge every month, and they're getting hit with all these extra charges. But again, you have to be pretty low on the financial spectrum to where Walmart's, a better deal than just a low fee bank. So interest rates, yep. Certificate of deposit. This implies a deposit where you have to keep the money in there for a certain length of time. So they're going to give you a slightly higher rate, but not high enough. Risk-free rate, there's different ways to calculate. The problem with the certificate of deposit is you put it in there, lock it in for a certain length of time, and you expose yourself to some risk, because if inflation keeps going like it is and you're getting 2% on your money, you're not making 2% on your money, you're losing 5%. So just something to keep in mind. Risk premium, yep, guaranteed by the government. So again, keep in mind that $250,000 limit, and that $250,000 limit really only applies to strict banking type things. Now, if it's so bad that banks are failing, the government's probably going to be failing shortly thereafter. So a guarantee by the government is not necessarily the best thing. Individuals with poor credit history pay higher rates. Yes, they do. So that's one of the reasons why you want to pay attention to your credit score. I'm not saying you need to go overboard. Generally, you'll find that you have more than enough credit as you go along. They will give you, enough rope to hang yourself. If you want to get in way over your head, you can do that. And sometimes not having that credit card is maybe, because they don't want somebody not paying off their credit card. Impact of the economy. Yep. Yeah, things that are kind of out of our control. Faulty reason limited. Yeah, risky investments. These guys are very conservative, but if you have that approach right now, and again you're getting 2% on your money, and inflation's at 7 or 9 or whatever, your money's being eroded away. Now there are times to kind of sit on the porch and kind of watch and see how things play out, and that might be the way to go with the stock market right now. I'm always pretty positive on real estate, and I think the overpaying for real estate is that's kind of come to an end, where people were offering more than the price that the house was listed and things like that. Now that insurance or interest rates are going up, it's changing a bit. So you're going to have, your risk tolerance should be divided up. There should be certain money that's, kept in a place of high liquidity, and then there should be other money should be, exposed to more risk, because you're not going to need that money for quite some time. So no choice is right. But anyway, I would. Man, I got a big old moose running around my yard right now. I thought it was one of my sheep. Oh man, the sheep are getting huge. Sorry for the distraction. But I've got a cow and a calf that are took over the place. All right. Term structure of interest rates. Yeah, we'll look at some of the investment options out there. What happens are that the U.S. Treasury, in order to cover the debt during certain times of high inflation, they need to increase the yield. They need to increase the interest rate that they're going to pay investors. They don't want to, but they have to in order to sell those, T-bills, T-bonds, whatever those Treasury securities are. So, and again, if you're able to keep it in there longer, they'll give you a better rate. But it's a very secure investment, very low risk, other than the inflation risk. So, shifts on the yield curve. Anyway, you can look at interest rates, you can look at charts, and so loan rates, the rates are going to be going up. And the spread, when they're paying you 2% and they're charging somebody 5%, that 3% is where the bank's making their money. Federal Reserve tries to control the money supply, but all the money that started being pumped into the market with COVID, and then other money that's being pumped in there, it's just throwing gasoline on the fire. The way the Fed tries to do it is they try to, manipulate interest rates. They try to do quantitative easing and now quantitative tightening, where they buy up securities to try to manipulate the market, and they don't always have great success doing that. So the Fed is the Federal Reserve, right? So it's it is called the Federal Reserve, but it's not necessarily part of the federal government. There is some interaction, quite a bit of interaction, but it's really more owned by the private banking sector. So you can go down all sorts of conspiracy rabbit holes with that one. Interest rates decrease. So if interest rates are going down, firms, that's where we were. Firms were getting big. People are more willing to borrow, and the stock market goes through the roof. That's not the situation we're in now. So the Fed has their part where they try to control things, but the business cycle also has their part, and then the government spending aspect also has a great effect. So shift in the business demand for funds. If companies aren't borrowing money or spending money, that can affect interest rates just like the, Fed manipulating. So again, getting back to sort of those decisions, and we'll look at that at the end of the thing when we look at the questions. So interest rates on deposits, mortgages, personal loans. But again, having all of those, Wells Fargo, or I guess now Freedom and AmeriHome seem to be the prominent ones jumping on the mortgages. Wells Fargo there for a while had a whole bunch in the mortgages. But anyway, where you do your banking and who holds your mortgage a lot of times are different locations. Here's some current rates. So this one, see where it says CD. So Goldman Sachs, when I was saying they weren't a consumer type thing, but they also have, subsets that do consumer type things. You won't find a Goldman Sachs branch here, but just the same, you could invest with them. Citibank, kind of no-name bank, or at least somebody I haven't heard of, but anyway, for example, the certificate of deposit, what you got to do to get this 2.7 interest rate is you got to have $500 down, minimum, and you got to keep it in there for at least a year. And this one, 2.5, 500. So I'd be tempted to go with that one. Anyway, but these are promoted offers. So, kind of trying to get new customers in. New customers, just 5 minutes to sign up. But anyway, regardless, if these are the best rates you're going to get, 2.7, that's just not a lot given the inflation. Now, back in the traditional times, 3 was kind of 3% inflation was kind of the normal. It'd been lower lately. It had gone quite low. 2020 because there wasn't as much demand. We're starting to get into COVID, so things are a little lower. But anyway, the current rate of inflation is 8.26%. So, and down from 8.5. But so let's say interest rates, just to be nice, let's just say it's 8%. So if you're getting 2.7 and inflation is 8%, you're losing 5.3%. You're not making money. Your buying power is being eroded quicker than you're earning it. So that's not going to work. And how did this happen? Yeah, quantitative easing. All this money being flooded into the system. Things just go nuts. $5 trillion. You throw that kind of money in there, and all of a sudden the system can't handle it. There are people who inflation works out great for. If you're a government that's hugely in debt, and you've got loans to pay, or on a smaller scale, if you're somebody who's carrying a mortgage, and inflation's screaming up, well, for me, for example, let's say I've got a rental house, which I do, a couple of them. Man, the rents I can charge are going up, and my mortgage is staying exactly the same as it was. So, year to year, my mortgage is going to be unchanged, but the rent I can charge is quite a bit higher. So, and that loan I've got doesn't seem quite as bad in 2022 dollars. It's going to seem even less in 2023. So, inflation doesn't hurt everybody equally. Who it really hurts is the poor, people trying to commute to work and just barely scraping by, like most things. This is the Dow. This is the stock market. That's kind of a graph that you like to see, and that's from the turn of last century. Going up by about 10%. So again, you've got options for investments. I'm not saying to dump all your money in the market, but it probably should be a component when, if you keep your money in the bank under high interest rates, you're getting 2.7, and here you're getting 4 times that. So that's why we will talk a fair amount about stocks and those types of investments. So this next chapter is just a little bit more, the last one we're talking about banking options. And to tell you the truth, I kind of blew it out of the water by saying that there weren't that many distinctions, that most banks, you can find that they all offer similar services. And so learning all those different categories between credit unions and banks, they're just not that big a deal. So this one's a little more strategic, what to do with your money. So money management, how you're going to set things up. Let's say you're in a job and you're starting to take in money. In fact, you've got excess money, which is a good thing. You need to set up an emergency fund, and then you need to start saving for retirement. Now, I'm not obsessed with saying to scrimp and not do anything and have this lavish retirement. No, you save for retirement, and then that nest egg is something that you use for other purposes. Plus peace of mind. So liquidity. Remember, cash liquidity equals quick access to cash. So credit cards for your liquidity. Interest rates usually high if you pay them. Don't keep a balance in your credit card, so who cares what the interest rate is? Maintaining liquid assets. Avoid using credit cards for paying high finance charges. The only way you pay the finance charge is if you don't pay your bill off every month. Then, you probably needed to have a little bit more of an emergency fund. But using, a credit card in combination with your emergency fund, i.e. if something blows up and you need to come up with $4,000, you put it on the credit card, and then you've got until that grace period, typically 30 days, to get that credit card back down to zero, and then start replenishing your emergency fund, and you're good to go. And you didn't pay any fees, and you had the super liquidity coming off of that credit card, so that was nice. Anyway, adequate return. Try to achieve the highest possible returns on short-term investments. It's difficult. High returns are, they're trying to do some get-rich-quick type thing. What you don't want to do is lock away your money in long-term losers, or have it exposed to identity theft type things. If you've got, say, more than somewhere between 5 and 10,000 in your checking account, you're kind of screwing up. That money should be invested somewhere where it's going to be getting a good interest rate. So checking account, useful, don't get me wrong, but don't keep a whole bunch of money in there. And definitely have some overdraft, because you don't want to have a whole bunch of money in there. And the way you typically do an overdraft, again, is with a credit card. Whereas if you happen to bounce a check, you don't keep track of a debit card, or you deposit a check, and again, these electronic transfers, sometimes, they won't take a mobile deposit, and all of a sudden your check bounces. Things are going to happen. So you don't want to be overdraft, because that's painful. I mean, the bank charges you, the merchant charges you, and you can't say that those are unreasonable fees, because technically you've broken the law, so you kind of just got to sit out there and take your punishment. Not good. Stop payment, not so useful anymore. I have used this before where somebody's written me a check and, through my own buffoonery, I lost it. And so I just called the person. I said, hey, look, you wrote me that check. Can you please put a stop payment on it? Which sounds like it's kind of screwing me, because now they know that once they put a stop payment, I can no longer cash that check even if I found it. And so, and then I said, after you've got the stop payment, can you write me another check? And they can do that without any risk to themselves because they issued a stop payment on the previous check. And yeah, they think I'm an idiot, but hey, it was a couple $1,000, so I needed the money, and they agreed to do it. So that was the end of it. Direct deposit, that's usually a prerequisite with most jobs just because it's a lot easier to do for everybody. The fees can vary, and they certainly vary. I mean, there's a couple local banks, and I don't want to name names, but man, they're double the price of the other places, and for nothing. Or they want to charge for mobile deposits and just silly stuff. I mean, they aren't keeping track that the competition does not. No interest on most checking accounts, and I absolutely don't care because I don't keep that much money in my checking account. I typically keep enough in there to avoid having to pay the fee, which is kind of, they're benefiting from that because I've got, say, whatever, $500 or $1,000 minimum, and that money is clearly not working for me, but that's the cost of doing business, is that I don't want to pay the monthly fee. But I'm not interested at all on them paying me interest on my checking account, because it's going to be insignificant. It's not going to be, maybe it's going to be 0.5%, maybe 1%. Maybe I'm only going to be losing 7% with the current inflation. I don't want to lose any. I'll put it in some other investment. They come up with all these buzzwords for different types of accounts. Nows were something big, negotiable. I mean, it just sounded good on their marketing stuff. The money market accounts, cash accounts, asset management accounts. They come up with all these different titles that have more to do with marketing definitions than they do true things. Typically, if you have a brokerage account, say you're buying stocks or mutual funds, you'll have some sort of cash management account. But it's more like a parking place. If you take dividends or something, if you have an income stock and they're paying you dividends, or you sell some stock, well, there needs to be some sort of place for that money to go. So usually when you open up a brokerage account, automatically they'll establish a money market account for you. And then you'll have, your mutual funds or whatever, and then you'll have this secondary sort of savings account that typically gets much better interest than a bank savings account. But again, it's not a true investment. You're not going to be outdoing inflation with that account. Savings deposits, yeah, again, silly concept. I don't do savings accounts with banks. They can get you into trouble. It sounds like nothing but war stories tonight. Sorry, but there was a lady I noticed I was starting to get hit on my credit card where there were recurring charges coming up, and they were some lady had, I don't know where she got my number, whether it was just blind luck or whatever, but she had been billing her cable bill against a savings account that I forgot I ever had. And that savings account only had, was back when I established the account, they said, we'll give you checking and savings, and I think that account had maybe $100 in it. So it didn't take very long, her paying her cable bill, to overdraft that account, and then it started rolling onto my credit card. And the whole thing was identity theft, or identity buffoonery. But anyway, the bank, because it had been going on for so long, they said that they weren't responsible. Well, I thought they were, and it took a little doing, but yeah, it was about $800 all in, and they gave me back every dime because I never authorized the use of my savings account, and it was completely obvious to anybody who would have noticed that, I in Alaska have no desire to be paying somebody's cable bill in Florida. So anyway, they didn't raise any flags on their part. And it was only through me checking I caught it. Certificates of deposit. So we talked a little about that. It involves typically a time thing. where you got to keep the money in there, and so you lose the liquidity. Money market demand account. Anyway, and now they're just getting down in the minutia between different savings type things. Again, you can see these things labeled as asset management. And I'm not saying there aren't differences in the account, but there's not some, law out there that says, oh, a money market must do this. No, it's whatever that bank or institution offers. And they'll usually have their own, name associated with it. T-bills, treasury bonds, all that kind of stuff. They're treasury security. That's where the T comes from. Not going to pay much in terms of interest, but very safe. Again, if you're buying these, probably not doing too well. I mean, in terms of investing, you're not going to be exceeding inflation with these. Money market funds. Yep. Could be some commercial paper, some commercial loans, but they're typically secured, large corporations. So this guy's excited that a 7-day yield of 3.28, that's a fairly high rate. I don't think you're going to find that right now. Asset management. So most of these asset management, money market accounts, they do this sweep function. And that's what I was talking about, where, it's sort of the parking place for the monies from your brokerage account. If you're going to, say you're going to sell some stock, you decided you wanted some money, or you wanted some money out of your mutual funds. Well, you sell the mutual funds, and then, again, this is kind of an antiquated process, but typically there's like a 3-day settling process, probably based upon, the time that it took some dude to ride to the, the bank in his buggy or something. Now it's all done electronically. But again, if the bank can hold on to your money for 3 days extra, deny you the use of it, they're all about that. So they're not going to change that law. So if you sell, say, some stock, typically takes about 3 days before that money settles to your account. And it would settle into your asset management or your sweep account or whatever. And then the check, you would withdraw from that cash account rather than directly from the stock or the mutual fund account. So here they're going to try and tell you what the differences are. There are some differences in terms of this one. I've talked about certificate of deposit has a you get a higher interest rate for giving it up for a specified period of time, like say 5 years, 1 year, whatever. And if you pull it out before then, you can get it, but it's going to be a penalty that's going to, take your interest rate back down to nothing. T-bills, again, government, relatively high interest rate. I don't know that I'd say any of those are high. Asset management account. Most brokerages now don't have high minimum balances, so again, their stuff's getting kind of outdated. So give up time, give up a little less time, and you want ultra liquidity, you're going to get a very low interest rate. Willing to give up liquidity, you'll get a higher return, is what they're trying to show you. Yep, the different risks involved. So things can change. CNN.com, not so much. There's obviously all sorts of financial type things out there, but even so, most people just go to whatever their preferred site is, and we'll look again at some of the brokerage companies. I'd given you kind of an overview of a couple of them, And we'll talk a little bit more about that again. Economic situations, yeah, we don't have a whole lot of control over some of these factors, so I'm not going to dwell on them. So let's jump right to the truth here. Weak economy. Actually, this is the strangest economy because there's all sorts of opportunities to work if you want to. But there's all sorts of valid reasons not to want to work that hard, too. Income may be reduced, sure. More reliance on other sources. Or you may get by with less, which is tough with inflation. Yeah, these risks are quite minimal. So they're roundabout way they're telling you to do what I was saying. Have enough money to pay your bills in your checking account. Have some sort of emergency fund, in a liquid type investment, and then push aside that other money into an account that will maximize your return, and also kind of establish a bit of a wall between your day-to-day checking account and your savings money. And I mean savings in terms of investment, not savings account. But the money, I'm not saying it's a one-way door, but it ought to be sort of once money goes into the investment realm, it should be used for big strategic purposes that appreciate, not something frivolous or something that depreciates. This is getting dated. They really don't like the stock market. I'm not somebody who's risk averse. I mean, I've got Bitcoin and all kinds of other stuff. But you just got to be smart about what you're doing, when to buy in, when not to. I'm not buying more Bitcoin until it drops below 10,000, and I don't think it's going to happen. So I'm not doing anything with crypto right now. Yep. It's always a challenge to find out how much you need to have. And you'll find your own thing. For me, literally, if I have $10,000 liquid, I don't. I'll shift it into a account, a brokerage account or whatever. I don't want that much cash lying around not doing anything for me. So I looked at the Fidelity site last week, talked about Vanguard, some of these other people, and then we'll jump into the term project. So yeah, I got an email from one of y'all, somebody going, knowing that the end of the term is going to get busy. In addition, especially in the fall term, you have holidays coming up, so you don't want to, be slammed at the end. So can you get ahead? Certainly. So 1 month in the term, we're at week 4, so we're kind of there. People always get confused about how do I even start. I mean, just start. That's the whole thing. It doesn't have to fit some template, whatever. It needs to address some things, but everybody's situation's unique. And this plan is written for you. So if you hit the length and don't game it up with a title page and a whatever page. References, sources are nice, but they don't really count towards your page goal because you need some meat to answer all the questions in here. So anyway, but in terms of you don't need to do APA or any kind of special formatting stuff. If you don't know what APA is, God bless you, that's great, because it's not that useful. You don't need that for this type of paper. If you want to cut and paste stuff out of financial sites, that's fair game. if especially if it adds to the project. And so you're going to look at, you know, what your tentative plan is. It's not necessarily, if you're a traditional college student and you're not really making any money now, it doesn't make a lot of sense to come up with a plan of what you're going to do with your extra, $20 each week. No, this would be more when you're in your career, so perhaps 5 years down the road. Anyway, you're going to have certain goals in life. It's always a plan. You don't know that you're going to have children. You don't know that you're going to do this, but you've got an idea, and so you figure out kind of what your goals are going to be. The student loan thing is just, a lot of people are kind of hurt with student loans because they're trying to pay those off during the same period of their life that they should be perhaps buying a house. But anyway, you want to get the loans taken care of. Social Security, this is just kind of a realization of how little that system will provide you if you think, oh, I'm good with retirement, I'm just going to live off Social Security. Yeah, it's not going to be great. Life insurance, we'll study more on that, but I may convince you that what you need is some sort of term life policy rather than some investment whole life complex product, but that's up to you. But anyway, you need life insurance when you're young and you've got a lot of responsibilities, and it's cheap for term life type stuff. And then when you get older, probably don't need it much. Investments, we'll start talking more about investments and how you're going to do that, how you're going to build wealth. You're not going to build wealth in a savings account. You could build wealth in maybe a small business, maybe some rental homes, maybe your own personal real estate, maybe stock market. Look and see for your career field how much money somebody makes. The example I always use is veterinarians. I've got some great friends who are vets, but there was one guy who was just so bitter, constantly reminded me how he did as much medical training as a doctor, yet didn't get paid as much. Well, that's no way to go through life. If he would have realized that, hey, I'm not going to get paid as much and I'm going to be a bitter, grumpy person my whole life, maybe that he shouldn't have stayed in that field, because he certainly seemed to have wrote his life with it. Military, good on you. I went that route, a lot of benefits there. But you do kind of, have this second career where it can be fun, or it can be, kind of shocking for some people. Tax deferred compensation, we'll talk more about this. 401k, this should be 403b. Thrift savings plan, that's a military type thing. But just about anybody, to include self-employed, can have some sort of tax deferred thing. I keep advancing the pages, my apologies. Anyway, personal finance type stuff. I mean, most people, I don't mean to be preaching continually here, but most people end up knowing a fair amount about personal finance by the time they retire. But the problem is that if they would have had that knowledge when they were young and could have put it to use in terms of compound interest and not spending money on stupid things, they could have been super wealthy and had a very comfortable life. But they didn't learn those lessons till late. So hopefully you'll figure it out quickly and be set. So again, and that's all this other sentence says. So you can kind of lay out that form, and if you're like, I'm so overwhelmed by all these questions, I don't know where to start. Well, where to start is, again, pick some brokerage. Maybe you're already associated with somebody, and just go to their site and don't sign up. You don't have to give them your email. You don't have to do any of that. But just get to the general part and just, planning and advice maybe. Build your free plan, financial basics. I'd stay away from robo-investing. I think there's other sources. But anyway, life advance, saving for a child. Just you read through these sections and you'll probably learn quite a bit. And it'll mention things. And, all these companies, this is where when I was talking about with the banks where they say, oh, well, you need to go to a bank for this type of thing, and you need to go. No, these companies, they want to be your one company, right? So I don't know that Fidelity really wants to be involved in crypto, but they know you're going to go someplace else if they're not doing crypto. So, they'll allow some sort of crypto involvement. It's probably going to be, crypto with training wheels or something. But whatever, they will at least give you a little bit of information on that, so that might be part of it. And there's a lot of these use cases, especially for Ethereum and some of these other cryptos, where it could really revolutionize some of the banking practices. So anyway, all that stuff is in there. So if you had that plan here and you went through, say, the Fidelity site, I think you could have a pretty good template, and then maybe fill in some details as we talk more about stocks and 401ks and some of the other ones. But you can at least get the framework done, and if you make it a useful plan, you'll get a decent grade. Also, one last thing for people who are really overwhelmed and don't know where to start, just do it. Send me a copy, a draft of what you got, and I'll kind of look at it and say, yeah, you'll get a B right now, or you can get better if you redo it. God, my throat is killing me. So we'll wrap this up pretty quick. I hate to keep coughing. So this was the homework. Like I said, not out of the book. So look at 3 banks. Just pick 3. Maybe your current bank, maybe a couple others, a local one, whatever. And what's important to you? Again, maybe you don't use ATMs, so you don't care. Maybe you use ATMs all the time, you're paying fees. Well, you shouldn't. Maybe you have some weird requirement. Literally, if I need to do a wire transfer, an international wire transfer, the local banks, they just lose their minds, or they want me to come in there and do it, like into their office, and then it's this big elaborate process. Whereas a bank in Texas, because they don't have the ability to do it locally, I do it right over the phone in 10 minutes. So different banks have different policies, so you really got to find what works for you, because there are huge differences between the banks. God, it's getting worse. I'm calling it quits. Good night.